Question would be, what do you think would be justified, if any, with regard to any form of capital gain? Do you have any figures or have any procedures been advanced to address the capital gains things in a more restricted manner, as I have suggested?
Well, in past years, Senator Dorgan has proposed capital gains tax cuts that would be limited to basically middle-income families. The virtue of that type of proposal, of course, is that since the middle-income families don't have hardly any capital gains, it's very inexpensive. You know, the president has been floating a capital gains idea to the Republicans that would limit the capital gains break just to the wealthy people and not give it to the middle class at all, or hardly at all. That's his plan, which is the opposite of what you were suggesting. I hope he doesn't actually put that one forward. If you did want to have a capital gains break for middle-income people, you could do it without spending very much money. On the other hand, would that, even if it wasn't very much, is that the best use of the money? I mean, would you rather spend it on capital gains relief, or do you think it ought to go to maintaining Medicaid or Medicare, or maybe it ought to go to families with children? I think capital gains would be pretty low in the priority list. At least it would be low on mine.
People have gotten rather mixed up, and they really don't think that there's going to be the deduction out of their pay for Social Security and all of that. I think it's very important to make it clear that that doesn't go away.
Under the flat tax, you mean?
Yes.
They keep they take the existing flat tax on wages, Social Security, and they add another flat tax on wages. That's the flat tax. And so if you make your money by interest or dividends or selling stocks, your tax rate is exactly 0. And if you make it from working, your tax rate is 15.3% plus the flat tax, say 35%.
I mean, what do we do to show people what this really is and before their eyes glaze over? Well,
you know, this isn't the first time this has come up. It seems to come up every 10 years, kind of like 10-year cicadas. In 1975, it was Bill Ruckelshaus, of all people, who was pushing it. In the early and mid-'80s, a couple of economists from Stanford came up with what is now the Army Plan, and they were all over the talk radio and the TV, and everybody was saying, what a great idea. And then they came down to Capitol Hill to testify, and the Reagan Treasury, of all people, came down too, and they said, by the way, this would raise taxes on everybody. And the economists said, yeah, that would, except for the rich. They agreed. They were honest in those days. And that was the end of it. And we're going through the same process now. The public has to read a little more of the fine print. There was an ad in one of the papers for automobiles that somebody reprinted the other day, and it showed all these great prices for cars. And there's a little asterisk. And down the bottom, you know where it's always an asterisk, but instead of the usual one, it said, add tax, tags, title, and $2,000. Well, that's the flat tax asterisk, and the public is going to figure that out. They don't know that their fringe benefits are going to be taxed from $1. They don't know that they're going to be paying tax on the employer-paid Social Security tax. They don't even know that the rich people aren't going to pay anything on interest and dividends and capital gains. But that's coming out. And when the public finds it out, this plan will be dead again. And that's why Bob Dole, who is a lot smarter politician than most of these other Republicans in the campaign trail, has not endorsed this plan.
My understanding is under GATT, we have trouble competing internationally because we can't take taxes off at the border. The only thing you can take off at the border is a value-added tax. And so a flat tax would not help us with this competitive problem. Is that true?
Well, it's even more interesting than that because the current system, the current income taxes, in effect, if you export, we don't tax all the exports. So there is some adjustment there because it's an income tax, because some of the profit is earned overseas. Under a VAT, we only tax domestic consumption, so that we tax imports and we exempt exports. But under the flat tax, in their wisdom, they came up with a plan that exempts imports and taxes exports. That's the trade policy of the Republican Party, is they want to tax our exports and exempt the imports.
That is another thing I think we need to do.
Now, the guys that wrote the plan, when this was pointed out to them, they said, well, it doesn't matter. So they admit it.
Would like to invite each of you, I guess, to repeat, but to reinforce the point that I think you were making, that once we get beyond the neatly contrived 7-year time frame for analyzing these budget proposals and tax proposals, the idea of balance becomes a myth. That the backloading, as you put it, of these tax cuts mean that at best we will have a kind of touch and go of balance in 2002, and after that, forget it. Am I missing something here, or is that roughly?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. Bob made several good points about how these costs balloon in the out years. The other point, which I mentioned, and let me mention it again, is that even in the 7 years, these numbers are wrong. The tax cuts that they have in their plan cost much more than they're admitting. They've really cooked the books on capital gains in particular, but some of the others as well. And so roughly I'd say that their tax cut plan is in the $80 to $100 billion range, more than they're suggesting just in the 7 years. Then when you get beyond that, the costs will balloon so that by the 10th year they're 50% higher than in the 7th, something like that?
That's right.
I think is going to be a tremendous backlash, and would either of you care to comment on that?
Well, I mean, you know, the Speaker of the House has said that the tax cut is necessary to give people something back in exchange for the lost federal programs. And the irony of it is that most people don't get anything from this plan. 2/3 of them don't. Some of that 2/3 see their taxes go up. So it's quite a trade-off for most middle and low-income people. We're going to take away the government programs, and we're not going to give you anything.
Who is it that's asking for a simpler tax?
Well, when you talk about the lobbying on tax simplification, the rule of thumb at the Ways and Means Committee is that the lobbyists find nothing too complicated if it cuts their taxes and nothing simple enough if it raises them. And yeah, there's some complicated things in the system, most of them necessarily so, some of them unnecessary, and we should address them. I wish I was tax czar for a couple of weeks and could rewrite the forms, because the tax form that a lot of people fill out is full of all these mentions of things that don't have anything to do with most people. And people assume, I think, a lot of people assume that there must be some special break for someone else, where usually they're the opposite of that. There's some provision that keeps people from abusing or whatever. But the forms are badly done, and that makes people suspicious. They think that there are people better off than them who aren't paying their fair share. And ironically, that makes some of them think the flat tax might be a good idea, when the flat tax, of course, has the opposite effect of that. It takes the existing loopholes and consolidates them.
If we have a continuing resolution where the squeaky wheel gets the grease, what happens to taxes in that? Does the chairman or either of our witnesses know?
Well, the only provision that is significantly affected for last year's taxes would be capital gains. So most people don't have to worry about it. They can go ahead and file, because most people don't have capital gains. Only about 7 or 8% do. Will a capital gains cut, if there is one, be retroactive? Seems sort of silly at this point, don't you think? I mean, you try to encourage past investments, even if you believe the theory, that it would encourage future ones. I don't know. I'd be very surprised if it was retroactive to the first of last year, but it's possible they might make it retroactive to October.
Some of the Republicans seem to be claiming that reductions in baseline from Medicare and Medicaid have nothing to do with the size of the tax cut.
I would say that's a silly statement on their part, Senator. Obviously, they're connected. They wouldn't need nearly as large reductions in federal programs if they weren't cutting taxes so much. That's just pure logic.
Certainly, if that fact, among others, should dispel any proposition that anyone is thinking that tax cuts generate revenue, has not been proven by history. Is that correct?
That's correct.
It's been pretty well disproven. You may remember Dutch used to say that he was going to pay for the defense buildup with the money they raised from their tax cuts. Well, that didn't work out, and now we have Jack Kemp saying it again. So welcome to 1981. Here we are.